I'm Gail from Yogabeme, and today I'd like to discuss the pose Adho Mukha Svanasana, which is normally called downward dog pose. Adho Mukha Svanasana, or downward dog, is very good for stretching the lower back, stretching the hamstrings, for strengthening the shoulders, the arms, and stretching out the spine, giving some space between the vertebrae, which is very good, for example, for people with scoliosis. This pose would be a very good one for them, but for everybody in the population generally, this would be a very good pose to practice if you are suffering from back pain that's just caused by sitting around too much on your computer, etc. Proceed with caution with this pose if you have very low blood pressure. Because it's a mild inversion pose, it's really good for people who have high blood pressure. If they practice it consistently, it can help them to lower their blood pressure. But unfortunately, for people with very low blood pressure, when you're coming up, if you have a postural drop again of your blood pressure, it can cause you to feel a bit unbalanced, perhaps faint. So you have to be careful if you've got very low blood pressure. If you have any shoulder, wrist or arm injury, you need to be very careful with this one also. So, Adho Mukha Svanasana, or downward dog, is a pose that's practiced in most classes that I've ever been to, most yoga classes. Sometimes it's a little bit overused, and the reason that I think that is that downward dog can be quite a challenging pose for people who have any kind of frailty or whose fitness level is reduced for whatever reason, or for people who maybe are a little bit older, maybe they've got wrist problems that are caused by, for example, osteoporosis, or just wear and tear, a lifetime of working hard. So we have to be careful that we don't wear our students out with this pose. And also for the students themselves, for you yourself, you have to understand when your body has had enough. And when you're in downward dog, if you feel that your body has had enough, the best medicine is you just gently come down to all fours and give yourself a rest from it. However, there are ways that we can make downward dog pose more accessible and easier done for most people. But we'll start first of all by doing the classic pose. You can come into downward dog from all fours or from standing tall. Sometimes in the class they come into it from a forward bend, but for the purpose of this session today, we'll come into it from all fours. So from a position of all fours, your shoulders would be squarely stacked above your wrists, your hands would be planted on the ground, and your weight of your shoulders and your upper body evenly placed between the hands. Your fingers would be spread out to give yourself some good grip there on your mat. Your hips would be stacked above your knees, nice and even, and then you would take your toes to the mat so that your feet are flexed. Your tummy muscles are engaged, and then you would just gently, making sure that your head is in line with the spine, it's not hanging down and it's not poking up like this, it's just in line, and then ever so gently you would start to raise your knees off the floor and you would take your bottom towards the sky, and that would bring your head in line with your arms. So your knees would be in line with your arms. Sometimes we have to lengthen our stance to get the best out of downward dog. So once we've lengthened that stance, we can push our bottom further up to the sky so that we can feel that stretch in the spine. Still keep some good space between the ears and the shoulders, and push back with your hands and your arms. Push back so that your bottom's going towards the sky. If you can't stretch your legs out straight, that's fine. You can keep your legs bent. And you can pedal your legs to start off with, just till you get used to the pose. And if you're stretchy enough and feeling that it's for you, you can take your heels down to the ground. But there's no need for that. That is not the aim of the game. The aim of the game is to keep the spine long. So if that means keeping the knees bent until you can do that, then that's what you do. And this is classic downward dog. When you finish that, come down to your knees as wide as the mat, toes together, and just take yourself down into a classic child's pose until you're ready to come back up to a sitting position or to all fours again. That's the classic downward dog, and it's the one that you will see most in a generic all levels yoga class. There are ways to make that more accessible to some people. For example, if you've got sensitive knees, if your knees are feeling a bit sensitive, you can put a blanket under your knees, and that would make this pose, when you're on the way down or before you go up, feel that wee bit more comfortable. So a nice cushion between your knees and the floor, especially in a yoga studio where you wouldn't have a carpet like we have here, you would have a hard floor, so a blanket's always a good thing. And if you feel that you need a little bit more height, if you think that would be beneficial for you because perhaps coming from the floor and going all the way up just feels a bit of a strain, you could use blocks, or if you're at home, you could use 2 big books or something like that. And you could put your hands on these just to make that more accessible. So from here, even if you've got a yoga mat, you could turn that over to stop them sliding. So from here, your knees would be on the mat and parallel there with your hips. Your hands again, nice and wide, gripping down onto that mat there, and your elbows, the inner elbows facing each other, and your upper arms nice and engaged, tummy nice and engaged, and then you would just take yourself up. Bottom going towards the sky, push yourself up into that bottom. You can even lengthen your stance a bit there if you want to just wiggle your feet back and forth, and lengthen into the spine, and then back down again with as much care as you can manage. Sometimes people feel that their shoulder girdle is preventing them from doing this comfortably, this action here, where your arm is just coming up in front of you and down in front of you like that. If that's the case, and you feel that you've got that sort of discomfort, there is always the option of keeping the hands wider than your shoulders, and that is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So your hands would be wider than your shoulders. If you've got some stiffness here that you feel that that's not nice, then you can even take your hands out just by 45 degrees or so. And if you choose to do that, you can then keep your feet together. So you can come up from this position. So you start off, your hands are wider than your shoulders, your knees together, your toes near, and then you take yourself up. And when you're up, if you feel that you could do with more stretch in the spine, you can take your feet further away ever so gently. Feel that stretch in the spine. Your ears are parallel with the upper arms. Your head isn't too low or too high like this. It's just there in line with your spine. You can pedal your knees out to get that stretch gradually in your hamstrings and your calves until it feels good for you. You can even bring your legs, your feet a little bit wider on the mat, or you can have the choice of bringing your hands together as well if that feels good for you. And you can feel that stretch in the shoulders there as well when you do that with the hands together. Always when you come out of this pose, very carefully, never bang down onto your knees, always very gently. As I say, if you've got sore knees, then you can use this blanket or something similar, a thin cushion from a chair, just to keep your knees good there. The other variation that you can do, if you're feeling that leaning on your wrists so much would be quite a difficult thing for you to do, you can do puppy pose. Puppy pose is the very same action as downward dog, except you are on your forearms there. So how you would start off with puppy pose, you would have your knees again parallel with your hips, stacked above your hips, and you would come down like this with your shoulders and your hands much less on the same rail track line as your hands. There you go. Shoulders, elbows and hands. And then, much the same, you've got a neutral spine here. Take your feet under and then just push your bottom up to the sky. I'm sliding on my mat, very common problem. And you can feel that there. You've not got the pressure on the wrists, but what you do have here is you have some good stretch there in the spine, and you have some good muscle work in your shoulder blades as well. So again, you can keep the knees bent in this position. You can have the feet together, and you can really feel that in the calves, or you can have them apart and you feel that more in the hamstrings. And again, as before, when you're ready to come out, you do so with care. These are the variations most commonly used in downward dog pose, and just a reminder before you practice it yourself, if you're using blocks and things like that, the reason I turned that over with the mat is because sometimes, as you've seen in the video, you just see me do it, I was sliding on the mat sometimes. This can slide on the mat, so make sure that if you've got a mat, you use it there and that stops it from sliding. You make sure that you know that the aim of the game there is to stretch your spine. It's not to stretch your legs. That's a secondary goal, not a primary goal. The primary goal of downward dog is to get some space in your spine, to stretch that back out and get some space in between the vertebrae, because we all have a life nowadays where we're on our phones too much, we're on our computers too much, and basically we're sitting more than our ancestors before us did. So these kinds of exercises in yoga are very good for us. Practice safely, practice gently, and remember the contraindications. If you have low blood pressure, if you have any shoulder, wrist, arm injury, perhaps not for you, proceed with caution, and I'll see you the next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.